Creepy things that were normal during the Vietnam War. Over the decades since the conflict ended, the Vietnam War has become an integral part of American culture, as well as military history, featuring in numerous movies, books, songs, and television documentaries. But did you know that during the Vietnam War, it was normal for soldiers to bring home some creepy things like shrunken heads, human skulls, and even whole corpses? Today, we'll explore some of the most disturbing and bizarre aspects of this conflict and show you why it's considered one of the most unpopular wars in American history. So make sure to watch the video till the end and do not forget to like the video. When you think of the Vietnam War, what do you imagine? Scenes from the movie Apocalypse? Most likely, but also death and destruction, as well as other things you might not expect. U.S. soldiers played with human skulls as toys and took photos of themselves with them. POWs were used as human minesweepers, meaning they were forced to walk in front of the army so that mines would blow up on them instead of their captors. Soldiers ate the flesh of their enemies while they were still alive. They used napalm against civilians, and doctors experimented with new drugs on soldiers without their knowledge or consent, just to see what would happen, and what did happen is that many went insane. Playing with human skulls as a toy. Even when you're in a war and surrounded by death, it can be hard to remember that your enemies are people. And while the soldiers might have had their own struggles with dehumanizing their opponents, there was plenty of evidence that they also found human skulls to be an amusing plaything. Skulls were used as toys or decorations, but they could also be turned into spittoons or used as drinking cups. After all, there's no such thing as too many opportunities for one person to pick up a skull and use it for something else. In some cases, this even led to musicians using human bone instruments. One guy would hold the skull with his left hand, with the teeth facing out, and strike the back of it with his right hand. Dead bodies burned at sea. One of the most disturbing things that happened during the Vietnam War was the practice of burning dead bodies at sea. The U.S. Navy did this because it prevented diseases from spreading, as it was a common belief during the time that disease could be spread by blood and bodily fluids from dead soldiers. Further, to prevent enemy forces from using corpses for propaganda purposes, or even worse, all bodies would be burned before being thrown overboard into the ocean. This also helped keep dead bodies away from those who might scavenge them for food in desperate times, a practice not uncommon among those living in war-torn regions today. Ear necklaces were worn like medals. The ear necklace is a tradition that has been around since the 1960s. Vietnam veterans wore them as a way of showing pride in the war, respect for the enemy, and remembrance of their fallen comrades. The idea behind this practice is that when a soldier kills someone, they take an ear from them as proof of their victory. This became known as ear cutting. The earrings are also thought to be good luck charms, whether it was because they believed they would help them survive another mission, or maybe even bring them back safely home again. Cannibalism of the enemy. Cannibalism has long been considered taboo by most cultures, but this was not always the case. Cannibalism was a common practice during the Vietnam War, though it was mostly practiced on enemies. The Viet Cong were known to eat the flesh of their enemies. In one instance, they cooked an American pilot and ate him alive. It is believed that this practice came from the fact that some tribes in Vietnam had cannibalized their own dead for centuries before modern civilization arrived there. However, despite these gruesome tales, neither side engaged in cannibalism as part of its regular military strategy, though it may have happened on isolated occasions. Psychological warfare. Psychological warfare is the use of psychological methods to mislead, intimidate, demoralize, or otherwise influence the thinking or behavior of an opponent. It is used to undermine the morale or fighting spirit of enemies through tactics such as fake weapons, propaganda, and disinformation. Sometimes it is called PSYOPs, from psychological operations, or political warfare. The Vietnam War was fought between South Vietnam and North Vietnam from 1959 to 1975. During this time, there were many psychological operations conducted by both sides in order to make each other believe that they had more strength than they actually did, so it would be easier for them to win their battles against each other. War glorification. War glorification is the glorification of war and the military in general. It is a way to make war seem like a good thing. In order for a war to be waged, there must be some justification for it. War glorification does this by portraying soldiers as heroes, martyrs, and patriots who sacrifice themselves for their country and thus earn glory. By making sure that people see soldiers as important people who are fighting for all that is good in this world, they can justify sending young men off to kill each other on battlefields far away from home. Ho Chi Minh's Brain Bank. The brain of the North Vietnamese leader Ho Chi Minh was removed after his death by Russian scientists, preserved in formaldehyde, and later transferred to a glass jar filled with liquid nitrogen. In fact, there were multiple copies of Ho Chi Minh's brain. One was kept at the National Museum of Ethnology in Hanoi by the Ministry of Culture. Now it is said that this jar contains only a replica. Another was at the Lenin Museum in Moscow, and a third at an undisclosed location. The U.S. using napalm, an extremely flammable material that sticks to the skin on civilians. Napalm is a mixture of polystyrene, benzene, and gasoline, which is highly flammable. It sticks to the skin when it burns and causes severe burns. Napalm was first used in the 1940s during World War II by the United States to destroy things like buildings and vehicles without getting close to them. During the Vietnam War, napalm was used on civilians as well as soldiers. This made many people upset because they felt it was cruel and unnecessary, since napalm wasn't needed to win battles or protect military bases from being destroyed. Being a child soldier. You may be surprised to learn that children were commonly used as soldiers in Vietnam. The United States is not the only country that has employed underage combatants. Children have been recruited and sent into battle throughout history, including in America's Civil War, Revolutionary War, Indian Wars, and more. In fact, there are many instances of children fighting in wars throughout history, including during World War II when Hitler was leading Nazi Germany's army against other countries, such as France and England, which are now called the UK. When Hitler invaded Poland during 1939 to 1940, he ordered all male children under the age of 14 who could fight to join his army so they would be trained as soldiers. He ordered all males between 15 to 18 years old to join him too, because they could also shoot guns at enemies who were trying to kill Germans. Agent Orange. Agent Orange is a nickname given to an herbicide used during the Vietnam War. The use of this chemical on military installations and in combat zones was widespread, leading many people to believe that it caused health problems. Agent Orange has been linked to various conditions, including type 2 diabetes, peripheral neuropathy, and prostate cancer. One of the most infamous aspects of Agent Orange is its connection with an increased risk of developing soft tissue sarcoma, STS, liver cancer, and Hodgkin's lymphoma. However, there are still some who argue that these conclusions are based on incomplete evidence and should not be trusted until further studies have been conducted into potential causes for STS development. Being born without limbs because of Agent Orange. The U.S. military used Agent Orange as a defoliant in Vietnam, and the chemical caused many birth defects in Vietnamese children. Veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange have passed on birth defects to their children, including cancer, skin disease, and missing limbs or organs. The Children of the Dust. The Children of the Dust were children born with birth defects that could be traced back to the use of chemical weapons. The most common deformities included cleft palates, webbed hands and feet, and mental disabilities. In some cases, these children were born with brain damage and learning disabilities due to the prolonged exposure of their mothers to chemicals during pregnancy. Though these effects were more subtle than those suffered by veterans who survived direct contact with mustard gas or sarin nerve agents, they still caused a significant amount of physical damage in their own right. Some children were born with physical disabilities, either as a result of poor prenatal care or because they lived near an area where chemicals had been stored improperly after being sprayed across Vietnam by U.S. military forces during Operation Ranch Hand, 1961 to 1971. The Tragedy of Cam Ne. The Tragedy of Cam Ne is a Vietnamese folktale about a group of children who were born with strange deformities. They were born without eyes, arms, and legs, or had an extra limb protruding from their face. The villagers believed that these children were cursed by the gods and kept them locked away from society to avoid any further desecration. When two fishermen came across this community one day, they decided to take pity on these poor creatures and set them free. The children ran off into the forest where they met another group of unfortunate people, orphans whose parents had been killed by soldiers during the Vietnam War. Together, they formed an army and fought back against their oppressors until all was right in Cam Ranh once again. Doctors experimented with new drugs on soldiers without their knowledge or consent. The military also experimented with mind control and drugs as part of a top-secret program code named Operation Midnight Climax. The goal was to observe the effects of LSD and other drugs on unwitting American citizens. Researchers would lure prostitutes into participating in these experiments by paying them for their services, then dose them with acid without their knowledge or consent. The researchers were curious about how LSD might affect men in war situations, so they also invited soldiers to participate in the experiment. These military volunteers were drugged with LSD and kept under surveillance for up to 5 days after exposure without having any idea what had happened. Not only did these soldiers not give consent for this experiment, they were ordered not to tell anyone about it. It wasn't until 1977 that the military finally admitted that this research had taken place at all. And even today, we don't know exactly how many people participated in this project or whether anyone suffered lasting damage from ingesting the drug unknowingly. During the Vietnam War, there were a lot of things that happened that we now consider horrific. These things were considered normal at the time, however, and they all had an impact on how we view war today. The Vietnam War was a time of great conflict and change. It was also a time of great loss and grief for many people. It was a time when people experienced great pain and suffering due to what happened during this conflict between countries in Southeast Asia. Finally, it was also a time when brutality became more common as soldiers from around the globe struggled against one another in this fight for power over land or something else entirely. This aspect depends on who you ask. Some of these things may come as a surprise to you, but the true horror is that this video could have been much longer. Much longer. The Vietnam War was a horrific war, and one with many problems that still affect people today. Agent Orange has caused birth defects in thousands of children and cut off limbs from babies born well after the war ended. People are still finding unexploded ordnances on their land, and there are plenty of toxic chemicals in the water supply thanks to the U.S.'s actions during the war. It's no wonder so many people want nothing to do with America. So there you have it, some of the creepy things that were normal during the Vietnam War. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.